Elmer T Lee 100-Year Tribute Special Release. Not much else to say. I am Jason C. and welcome to the Mash and Drum Whiskey Room. Elmer T Lee is just about as famous as the name gets in the bourbon world. His contributions to his country and his craft made him an industry legend and his namesake bottle one of the most hunted bourbons on the market. What Elmer did for American whiskey cannot be measured, and it's hard to believe in today's age of the bourbon boom. Elmer T Lee was born in 1919 on a tobacco farm near Peaksville, Kentucky. He wanted to become a veterinarian, and in 1949, after serving as a radar bombardier in World War II and returning to an engineering degree at the University of Kentucky, the Stag Distillery, then owned by Schenley Corp, hired him and put him on in the maintenance department. At that time, whiskey was on the rise post-Prohibition, and Elmer added his expertise into the expansion of the distillery and implementing a checks and balances system on the stability of warehouses and thousands of barrels checking for leaks. In 1966, he was named plant supervisor overseeing all aspects of production until the 1980s when he was named master distiller. The humble man he was, he said that naming him master distiller was really just for marketing purposes. One of the coolest facts I read was in 1978, there was a record-setting flood at the distillery site where water came in high enough to cover the first 2 floors of some of the warehouses. If you've ever taken any of the tours at Buffalo Trace, they do touch on this in pretty good detail. Freddie Johnson noted that Elmer Tandy Lee himself would jump in a boat and go building to building, checking every barrel to make sure they were okay. He was a beacon of hard work and passion. Unfortunately, in the 1970s and 1980s, the bourbon industry was struggling and low sales were hurting the bourbon industry across the board. Warehouses were closing, being sold off, and the once proud Stag Distillery was declining rapidly. Schenley sold the distillery to private investors who wanted layoffs and operation cuts, but Elmer T Lee believed that bourbon would bounce back, and instead of giving up, he had another idea. In 1984, Lee introduced the bourbon world to Blanton's, the first single-barrel bourbon, inspired by stories about one of his predecessors, Albert Blanton, who would save honey barrels for private use. Lee selected a small number of high-quality casks and had them bottled individually with the details handwritten on the label. Now, at that time, most bourbon cost under $10, and Blanton's went for $30. Pretty remarkable when you think about the prices now that you see Blanton's at. It didn't sell well at first since consumers knew bourbon was a low-priced product. Now, Lee believed he made a career-ending mistake, but he continued to push his new product, taking to the road on long road trips to give tastings at liquor stores, racetracks, and anywhere else he might find curious whiskey drinkers. Eventually, his hard work paid off, and bourbon's recovery, which began in the early 2000s, had a new legion of curious bourbon drinkers who wanted to sip their whiskey neat, and what better way to do that than with Blanton's? Today, its grenade-style bottle, handwritten labels, and iconic horse stopper is one of the most recognized bottles in the world. Elmer T Lee, with the help of Booker No, Jimmy Russell, and other bourbon legends, helped save bourbon, and we will always be in debt to them. Of course, not long after, Elmer T Lee himself was honored with his own single-barrel bourbon, which is one of the most sought-after bottles still to this day. Elmer T Lee officially retired in 1985, but he continued to work at the distillery as a consultant. As the bourbon industry got more successful, so did the legend of Elmer T Lee. He was named to the Bourbon Hall of Fame in 2001. In 2012, he became the first American to receive the Whiskey Magazine Lifetime Achievement Award. Even after retirement, Elmer still visited Buffalo Trace several days a week to consult, and even picked barrels up until Elmer Lee passed away in 2013, just a few weeks shy of what would have been his 94th birthday. And that brings us to today's review, where his contributions to the bourbon world and his legacy is being celebrated with the Elmer T Lee 100-Year Tribute Bottle from Buffalo Trace. Paying homage to the 100 years since Elmer T Lee's birthday, this bottle is fittingly bottled at 100 proof, has the same mash bill 2 recipe as you know and love, and also has the same age, which is said to be about 8 to 14 years old, depending on the barrel. Elmer T Lee 100-Year Tribute Single Barrel Bourbon hit the shelves last fall in very limited quantities at a suggested retail price of $100, but as most of you know, bottles have been seen upcharged for about $400 all the way up to $800 a bottle. Now, I was really lucky to find this bottle in New York around the holidays. I've been able to have a few pours of this, as you can see. It's changed a lot since the first pour, and I think for the better. I've been wanting to share this one with you guys and compare it to the regular Elmer T Lee bottle and find any similarities and differences once I spent more time with the 100-year tribute. So let's get into the nose first, see what we get. So the first thing that jumps out of this glass is the fruit forwardness of it. There's a lot of fruit in here. I'm getting a little bit of peach, a little bit of apricot maybe. There's some strawberry or plum notes going on as well. When I first opened it, it was pure maple syrup and oak. But as it's opened up, the air has done really a world of good to it, and it's really made it nice and fruity. Ton of vanilla, like deep dark vanilla extract. Definitely caramels. There's still some maple syrup on the nose. It just wasn't as prominent as it was when I first opened it. I think the air has given it way more balance. It's just really delicious on the nose. The interesting thing, though, what I found is when you really kind of get some air into it, take a little bit of a deeper dive on the nose, you start getting this chocolate mocha coffee note going on very deep in the nose. It's so interesting, really, really unique. So you have that mix of fruit, vanilla, caramel on the beginning of the nose, and then as you just get a little bit deeper, get a little more time, this coffee chocolate note starts coming out on the back end, along with some really sweet oak, that really nice sugary sweetness that you get from a Buffalo Trace. Yeah, it's just such an enticing nose. I mean, you could sit here and nose this glass all day because it does open up and release some really great flavors. So let's go into the first taste and see what we get. Cheers to Elmer T Lee. That 100 proof on this makes such a difference. There's so much more viscosity to it, so much more flavor than I remember in the regular Elmer T Lee offering. You get so much more fruit. That fruit really carries its way through to the front of the palate. It's very sweet. A ton of vanilla, some caramel there. Really, really potent. Man, on that back end, though, that slight hint of chocolate and coffee just all of a sudden just bursts out of nowhere. It's really, really unique. Let's go for another sip. So that sip, the coffee chocolate note kind of diminished a little bit, and now the maple syrup more is coming through. Creamy vanilla, maple syrup. I mean, the vanilla is really intense. It's a lot of vanilla, a lot of caramels, dark brown sugars, sweet oak on the back end. Oh wait, that coffee is kind of making its way back here. But still extremely fruity too on the palate. That strawberry, kind of a strawberry maple syrup jam type thing going on is just really intense. Let's go for another sip. This is everything you love about Elmer T Lee. The vanillas, the caramel, some of the fruit flavor profiles. Everything is just amped up to the next level, and it's so sweet, so delicious. It leaves this really beautiful lingering spice to it. I'm getting a little black pepper, a little more clove there on the back end, but it's also mixed in. If you've ever had dark chocolate spiked with cayenne pepper, you have like a spicy chocolate note. That's what you get on the back end here, at least in this bottle. It's just really intense. It's opening up really nicely. Let's go for another sip. I am loving the fruitiness of this. I mean, it is so fruit forward, but also balances out really well on the back end. It's so layered. There's so many layers to this. There's two distinct layers that I'm getting. Well, maybe three. Basically, when you first try it, you get hit with all this vanilla, this caramel sweetness. Then all of a sudden, this burst of fruit just hits you right on the mid-palate. You can feel it on the sides of your tongue. Get a lot of strawberry. Man, maybe a little bit of, strawberry. A little bit of blackberry there, too. Really nice right on the mid-palate. Then all of a sudden, on the back end, it becomes like this darker, deeper, rich whiskey where you start getting coffee, chocolate flavors as well. Maybe a hint of cherry too. Just such a beautiful balance. Let's go for one more sip before we compare. So as you sip, some of the flavors diminish a little bit, but what you're still left with is the vanilla, the fruit, the really delicious, that signature Buffalo Trace, that sweet oak profile. And then, yeah, again, a little hint of that chocolate. Not so much coffee anymore. It's coming through as a little bit more of a chocolate and toasted sweet oak on the back end. Just a delicious release. I mean, so, so good. All right, let's compare it to the Elmer T Lee regular 90 proof bottle here. So this is a lot lighter, a lot brighter. You could smell that signature Buffalo Trace, that toasted pecan note. You get a little bit of that vanilla, the caramel. It's just not as deep and dark and rich as this bottle here. I think there is some fruitiness to it as well, which is a kind of a good similarity that I'm getting from this bottle. But it's just not nearly as deep and dark and rich as the Elmer T Lee 100. When you smell them, you know, when you compare, you can really see the differences. But this bottle has everything you love in an Elmer T Lee. It's got beautiful balance, the vanilla, the caramel. There is some fruit there too. I think it's a little bit lighter. It comes through with that toasted pecan note as well. Let's go for a sip. Here we go. Yeah, so what you get on this one, in this particular single barrel, remember these are single barrels, so they can differ a little bit from bottle to bottle. But what I'm getting on this one that's somewhat similar to this is the fruit characteristic. There's a lot of fruit that I'm getting on the front of the palate. It's very sweet. It's almost like a dried pineapple type of aspect going on. It's not deep in, this is more bright fruits, whereas this is deep, dark fruits. You're getting, it's like blackberry versus peach. So you got that dark versus the light. This is really nice, really bright, very fruity. Let's go for another sip. Yeah, the vanilla, the caramel characteristics that come through, that peppery spice from that second mash bill, which is Buffalo Trace's higher rye bourbon mash bill. Definitely comes through. Get a lingering sweet oak profile there, but you're not getting those other layers that you're getting in here. Let's go back to the 100 Tribute. Yeah, doing the comparison, it's just, the 100-year Tribute just has a deeper, richer, darker profile with that's just a little bit, well, not a little bit, it's a lot more amped up when you do the comparison. But when you compare them, the Elmer T Lee, it's kind of light versus dark. The regular Elmer T Lee, you kind of get those peaches, apricots. You still get that nice toasted pecan note, good amount of sweet oak flavor, but it's just lighter and brighter. When you go to the 100 Tribute, this thing is just chocolate and a little bit of coffee to it. As I mentioned, it's dissipated a little bit, but then you got these dark red berries, these dark fruits, the deep caramels, the vanillas are just, everything is just darker and richer. It's just a really great release, the 100 Tribute, and definitely one of those bottles I'm going to be bringing out for special occasions. So this bottle to me, as I kept sipping on it, just became so nuanced, so layered in flavor. You know, I wasn't going to review it at first because I know how hard this is to get, and I know a lot of you out there will probably say, you know, what is it reviewing this for? I'm never going to ever see this bottle. But I did want to review it because I did want to pay homage to the man, Elmer T Lee himself. If you watch my channel, you know I'm a big history buff when it comes to bourbon, and I really wanted to pay tribute to the man he was and what's in this bottle. It's a delicious bourbon, it's nuanced, it's layered, it's got a lot of deep, dark, rich flavors to it, and it was definitely worth reviewing. Now, if you were one of the lucky ones out there to find a bottle of this, please keep it, please sip on it, please share it. Please share the story of Elmer T Lee, who he was, what this bottle means, what he meant to the bourbon industry, how he helped save the bourbon industry. I think when you hear the stories behind some of these bottles, as hard as they are to get, you know, when you do sit down with these bottles, some of them just taste a little bit sweeter when you know the history behind them. All right, everyone, well, I hope you enjoyed this review for the Elmer T Lee 100-year Tribute special release. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the subscribe button below. Please hit the like button. If you haven't yet, find me on Instagram and find me on Twitter. Always love hearing from you guys, and as I always say, it is not about the whiskey, it's the people you share it with. So cheers, and cheers to Elmer T Lee. Take care, and I'll see you next time on The Mash and Drum.